"Son, I just wanted to see if the old girl still ran." Those were the last words Virgil Halloran spoke before the rangemaster dropped a stopwatch on the counter with a smirk and told him to prove it. 78 years old, hands shaking, a rifle older than most of the men in the room, and a young kid in tactical pants laughing behind mirrored sunglasses. "Blindfolded, Grandpa. Full field strip. Let's see what the VA actually taught you back in the caveman days." Virgil didn't answer. He pulled a red bandana from his back pocket, tied it over his eyes with his own shaking hands, and rested his fingers on the receiver of an M14 that had been out of US military service longer than the rangemaster had been alive. 47 seconds later, nobody on that firing line was laughing. If you believe older veterans still deserve the respect this country promised them, comment the word respect below before we start this story, because what happens next on a Tuesday morning in rural North Carolina is something every American in every generation needs to see. The sun had not fully crested the ridge behind his house when Virgil Halloran carried the steel lockbox out to his pickup and set it in the passenger seat the way a man sets down a sleeping child. The truck was a 1994 Ford F-150, dark green, rust crawling up the rocker panels, a faded Marine Corps sticker in the back window so weathered you could barely make out the words Semper Fi. He'd owned it 29 years. He'd promised his wife Eleanor he would replace it one of these days. Eleanor had been gone 4 years this coming November, and he was not much for breaking promises to the dead, so the Ford stayed. Inside the lockbox, wrapped in 2 layers of oil-soaked cotton rag and a 3rd layer of wool blanket folded the way the armourers at Quantico had once folded them, was the rifle. He did not take it out. Not yet. He sat in the driver's seat for a long minute with his palm flat on the lid of the box, and his eyes fixed on the tree line where the mist was still lifting off the pasture. His right hand trembled against the steel. The tremor had started in 1983 and had worsened after Eleanor's funeral. The doctors at the VA in Durham had a clinical name for it, a long Latin phrase with 3 syllables he never bothered to memorize. He had a different name for it. He called it the reminder. He was a small man now. Age had shrunk him the way old stone gets shrunk by rain, not weakened exactly, but reduced to essentials. His hair was white and cropped to a 1/4 inch above the scalp. His jaw was clean-shaven, his boots were polished, his flannel shirt was tucked in and belted tight. On his right forearm, just above the wrist, there was a tattoo so old it had faded to the colour of a bruise under pond water, an eagle, a globe, an anchor, and beneath it 4 numerals that meant something to him, and to roughly 12 other men still drawing breath in the lower 48. He turned the key. The Ford coughed twice and caught. "All right, old girl," he said, to the truck or to the rifle or to both of them at once. "Let's go see if anybody still remembers us." What Virgil did not know, what he could not have known sitting in that driveway in the pale grey light of a Tuesday morning in October, was that 42 miles west of his front gate, on the other side of a 2-lane road called Cedar Ridge Pass, a 26-year-old man was at that very moment unlocking the chain on a commercial shooting range and deciding, quietly and without remorse, that today was going to be the day he finally taught one of these old-timers what the modern world looked like. Cedar Ridge Tactical sat at the end of a gravel road between a dairy farm and a patch of clear-cut pine. It was not a fancy range. It was not supposed to be. The main building was a long, low, sheet metal structure with a plate glass storefront on the east end, and 16 enclosed bays stretching out behind it toward a dirt berm shaped like a horseshoe. Inside, the air smelled like gun oil, stale coffee, and the faint bitterness of fresh copper from the indoor bullet trap. A television behind the counter played a muted cable news segment nobody was watching. A flag the size of a queen-sized bedsheet hung from the rafters, just slightly crooked. A hand-lettered sign beside the register read, "No loaded weapons past this point," in letters that had been touched up at least 6 times. The man behind the counter was named Chase Brennan. He was 26. He was 6'2". He wore Cryptek camouflage pants, a fitted black polo with the Cedar Ridge logo embroidered on the chest, and a pair of mirrored aviators pushed up onto the top of his shaved head. He had been a rangemaster for 18 months. Before that, he had spent 4 years in the Army National Guard, where he had filled sandbags after a hurricane, attended one annual training exercise in Louisiana, and earned an expert marksmanship badge at his final qualification. He had never been deployed. He had never heard a round fired in anger. He believed himself In a quiet, private way he would not have admitted to anyone, to be a natural warrior in a country full of pretenders, and he found in the daily operation of Cedar Ridge Tactical 1,000 small opportunities to confirm that belief. He poured himself a third cup of coffee and watched through the storefront window as an elderly man in a green Ford pickup backed carefully into a parking space near the door. The man took a long time to get out. He took a longer time to walk around to the passenger side. Chase watched him lift a steel lockbox off the seat with both hands, adjust his grip twice, and start toward the door at the pace of a man who no longer trusted his own feet. Chase set down his coffee and smiled the small private smile of a man whose day was about to become interesting. 3 shooters were already inside the shop. A heavy-set carpenter in a Carhartt jacket stood by the ammunition wall, reading the box of a 50-round pack of 7.62 NATO. A father and his teenage son were standing near the rental case, arguing softly about whether to try a 9mm or a 40. A woman in her 30s, there for a concealed carry refresher, was filling out a liability waiver on a clipboard. None of them looked up when the bell above the door rang, but every one of them would remember the next 90 minutes for the rest of their lives. Virgil stepped into the shop, nodded once at Chase, and walked slowly to the counter. He set the lockbox down between them with great care, as if the box itself were fragile. His right hand was trembling visibly now, a small, steady vibration, the kind that makes coffee ripple in a cup. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Chase said. "You lost, buddy?" Virgil looked up. His eyes were the colour of worn denim and they did not flinch. "I'd like to rent a lane, please. An hour will be fine." Chase let the silence stretch just a beat too long before he reached for a clipboard. "Yeah, okay. I'm going to need to see some ID, and I'm going to need you to fill out the waiver. You got a firearm on you, or are you renting?" "Brought my own," Virgil said. "Uh-huh." Chase clicked a ballpoint pen against the counter. "What are we talking about? Little .22? Single-action revolver? I got a guy comes in Thursdays, brings his granddad's service pistol. We set him up on the close range. Real nice setup for you." "M14, Virgil said. Chase stopped clicking the pen. "From a 14, he repeated, as if he might have misheard. "Yes, sir." "You got an M1A, Chase said. "A Springfield M1A? That's the civilian version. That's what you mean, probably." Virgil blinked at him slowly. "I know the difference between an M1A and an M14, young man. I have an M14. Chase smiled the smile he had been waiting all morning to use. "Sir, you understand a true M14 is a select fire rifle, right? You can't just—" "Semi-auto conversion. Registered. Paperwork in the box with the rifle. I can show you if you'd like." Behind him, the carpenter in the Carhartt jacket, a man named Mike Donovan, 49 years old, father of 2, who had done 1 tour with 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines in Fallujah in 2004, quietly put down the box of 7.62 he had been holding and turned his head half an inch. He did not stare. He had long ago learned not to stare. But he was listening now the way a hunting dog listens when it hears a sound the hunter has not yet noticed. Chase slid the clipboard across the counter. "All right, Pops, fill this out. Let me know if the small print's hard to read. I can find you some readers if you need them." Virgil took the pen in his shaking right hand, paused and switched it to his left. He began to write. His handwriting came out in small, careful block letters. His name, his date of birth, his address, the serial number of the rifle, which he wrote from memory. Chase watched him the whole time with an expression that hovered somewhere between pity and amusement. The woman with the concealed carry paperwork glanced over, saw the tremor in Virgil's hand, and quickly looked away. When Virgil finished, he slid the clipboard back across the counter. Chase took it without looking, tossed it on a pile of other waivers, and turned toward the computer. "I'll put you on lane 12, back end of the building. Nice and quiet. You going to need any help carrying that box?" "No, thank you." "You sure? Because those things get heavy and I can't have you." "I'm sure," Virgil said. His voice did not rise. It did not harden. But something inside it changed the temperature of the room by 2 degrees, and Chase, for a reason he could not have put into words, stopped talking in the middle of his sentence and reached for the lane assignment slip without finishing what he was going to say. Virgil took the slip, nodded once, picked up his lockbox, and walked toward the door that led from the shop into the enclosed range. He moved slowly. He moved as if every step had been measured. The woman at the counter turned her head to watch him go, and when she did, she caught sight of a second tattoo at the back of his neck, just above the collar of his flannel shirt. Small, faded, hand-stitched into the skin in a way that modern tattoo shops no longer produced. Crossed rifles, distinguished rifleman. She did not know what it was. But Mike Donovan, 4 feet behind her, did. He watched Virgil disappear through the door. He watched the door swing shut. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out his phone, and stepped away from the counter toward the far end of the ammunition aisle, where the signal was better and the voices were quieter. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he had not called in almost 2 years. He touched the name. He held the phone to his ear, and somewhere 68 miles to the east, in a converted feed store on the edge of a town most Americans had never heard of, a phone on a polished oak desk began to ring. The door to lane 12 sighed shut behind Virgil on its pneumatic closer, and for the first time that morning he was alone. The lane was narrow, carpeted in dark grey, walled on both sides by soundproofing foam the colour of dried blood. At the far end, 25 yards down, a paper silhouette hung on a retractable carrier, waiting. He set the lockbox on the shooting bench and stood for a moment with both hands flat on the lid, breathing through his nose. He did not open the box right away. He reached instead into the inside pocket of his flannel shirt and took out his wallet. It was old. The leather had gone soft and pale at the corners. He opened it, thumbed past the expired driver's license and the yellowed VA card, and slid out a photograph that had been folded once and then unfolded, and then creased flat 1,000 times. The photograph was black and white. 2 young men in marine utilities stood shoulder to shoulder on a dirt road in front of a line of sandbags. One of them was holding an M14 across his chest in the port arms position. The other one was laughing at something outside the frame. The one with the rifle was Virgil Halloran at 23. The one laughing was a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, named Wendell Royce Carter, who would be dead in 41 days from a round fired by a man neither of them had ever seen. Virgil looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he kissed his thumb, pressed it lightly against Wendell's face, slid the photograph back into his wallet, and put the wallet back into his pocket. He opened the lockbox. The rifle inside was not new. Nothing about it was new. The stock was walnut, oiled and polished and darkened by 57 years of handling. The barrel was parkerized a flat, deep charcoal. The receiver had been reblued twice, once in 1974 and once in 1998, both times by the same armourer, a retired gunnery sergeant named Roy Jenks who had died of cancer in 2004. On the underside of the stock, where no one would see it unless they knew to look, there were 4 small notches cut into the wood with the tip of a K-bar. Virgil had cut 3 of them himself a long time ago. The 4th notch had been cut by Wendell, on the last night Wendell had been alive, for reasons he had never explained to anyone and now never would. Virgil lifted the rifle out of the box with both hands. His tremor did not stop, but the moment his palm settled against the small of the stock and his fingers closed around the grip, something in his body rearranged itself. His shoulders dropped 1/2 inch. His breathing slowed. The tremor in his right hand did not disappear. It just became, somehow, less important than the thing the hand was holding. He laid the rifle on the bench. He laid out a box of match-grade ammunition beside it. He pulled a cleaning rag from the inside of the lockbox and wiped down the bolt, even though the bolt did not need wiping. He was not ready yet. He was remembering something. He was saying hello. On the other side of the range, in the shop, Chase Brennan was leaning on the counter, telling the woman with the concealed carry paperwork a story about a guy he claimed had brought in a Mosin Nagant last summer and not known how to work the bolt. The woman laughed politely. Mike Donovan, the carpenter, was still on the phone. He was speaking quietly. He was using very few words. When he finally hung up, he slipped the phone back into his pocket, walked up to the counter, and set the box of 7.62 ammunition down between himself and Chase. "I'll take these," Mike said, "and I'd like lane 11, please. Right next to your friend in 12, Chase grinned. "Gonna keep an eye on Grandpa, huh?" "Something like that," Mike said, and the way he said it, flat, level, without a single note of humour in it, made Chase look up at him properly for the first time, and for a half-second the smile on Chase's face wavered, because there was something in the carpenter's eyes he did not immediately recognise and did not entirely like. Then Mike looked away, and the moment passed, and Chase recovered himself and rang up the ammunition. 62.50, Chase said. "You all set?" "Not yet," Mike said, "but I will be." He took his receipt, picked up his box of rounds, and walked past the counter toward the range door without another word. Chase watched him go, and the smile on his face, which had not entirely returned, slipped a little further, Out in the parking lot through the plate glass storefront window, the October sun was beginning to burn off the last of the morning mist. The flag on the pole by the road snapped in a gust of wind. A black pickup truck turned off the highway and started up the gravel road toward the range. Chase did not see it. He had turned back to the counter and was already composing, in his head, the line he was going to use on the old man in lane 12 when he made his routine walkthrough of the bays in 15 minutes. He thought it was going to be funny. He thought the woman at the counter might laugh. He thought this was still going to be a good day. Inside lane 12, Virgil Halloran loaded a 20-round magazine with careful, slow, deliberate movements, seated it into the magazine well with a soft metallic click, and did not yet pull the charging handle. He set the rifle down on the shooting bench with the muzzle pointed safely downrange. He took a long breath. He closed his eyes. And in the quiet privacy of that narrow padded lane, with no one watching and no one to impress, he spoke out loud, so softly that even a microphone 2 feet away would not have picked it up. "Wendell," he said, "let's see if I still got it." Chase Brennan waited exactly 17 minutes before he walked the range floor. He did it with a clipboard tucked under his arm, because he had read somewhere that clipboards made authority figures look more legitimate, and because he enjoyed the small theatre of it. He liked to pause at each lane, peer through the rear observation window, make a note he did not need to make, and move on. The shooters all saw him do it. That was, of course, the point. He stopped at lane 12 longer than the others. Through the rectangular window set into the rear door, he could see the old man in the flannel shirt working slowly over his rifle. The M14 lay across the bench. Virgil was sitting on the bench stool, not yet shooting, running a boar snake down the barrel. His right hand trembled as he worked. He used his left to steady the snake. The whole process took about twice as long as it should have, and Chase watched for a full 30 seconds before he stepped back from the window, adjusted his polo shirt, and pushed the door open. "How we doing in here, Chief?" he said. Virgil looked up. "Just fine. Thank you." "That's a real piece of history you got there," Chase said. He stepped inside the lane and let the door close behind him. He did not ask permission to come in. He did not need to. It was his range. "I'm guessing the VFW lets you bring that out on the 4th of July, huh? Parade duty?" "It comes out when it needs to," Virgil said. Chase looked at the rifle on the bench, at the M14 receiver with the old Parkerized finish, worn to silver along the edges at the walnut stock oiled and dark. He whistled. "Looks like it's been rode hard. You want me to have one of my guys look at it before you try to fire it? I got a kid out back. He's done a couple of armourer courses. He can take a look, make sure she's not going to blow up in your face, no charge." "No, thank you." "You sure? Because that thing looks like—" "I'm sure," Virgil said. Again, quietly. Again, that small, inexplicable temperature change in the room. Chase leaned against the divider wall and folded his arms. He watched the tremor in Virgil's right hand as the old man reached for a patch of cleaning cloth. He smiled. "You know, Pops, I don't mean any disrespect. I really don't. But with that shake you got going on, you might want to stick to a 22 today. I got rentals up front, $40. I could even waive the range fee. I don't want to see you hurt yourself." Virgil laid the cleaning cloth down. He turned and looked at Chase Brennan fully for the first time all morning. His eyes were steady. The rest of him was not. The hand on the bench still trembled. The shoulder beneath the flannel shirt still sagged forward. But the eyes did not move. "You still run timed drills here, son?" Virgil said. "What?" "Timed drills. Field strip, reassemble. Used to be every range of any quality ran 'em. Had a board on the wall, best times. Just wondering if you kept the tradition." Chase let out a laugh, short and surprised. Yeah, we've got a board. Over by the register. Nobody does field strips anymore, though. That's kind of old school. We do draw to first shot times now, that kind of thing. It's more useful." Virgil said. "I'm sure it is. But I was wondering if you'd indulge an old man." Chase's smile widened. He could see it now, laid out in front of him like a gift. The moment, the audience, the story he was going to get to tell later. He could practically hear himself telling it at a bar on Friday night. "You want me to time you," he said. "You want me to time you field stripping that M14? If it's not too much trouble." "Sir?" Chase was grinning now. He had to work to keep the grin inside his mouth. "I will absolutely time you. In fact, I'll make you a deal. You do it blindfolded, full field strip, the whole 9 yards, no peeking, and if you break 60 seconds, I'll refund your lane rental and throw in a box of match grade on the house. How's that?" "Blindfolded," Virgil said, as if he were tasting the word. Blindfolded. Come on, Pops, you said it yourself. Old school. Virgil reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a red bandana, faded almost pink at the edges, frayed along one side, folded neatly into a triangle. He laid it on the bench beside the rifle. He looked at Chase Brennan with those denim blue eyes that did not blink. "All right," he said. "Get your stopwatch." Chase grinned all the way back to the shop. He walked past the counter, ignored the woman with the concealed carry paperwork entirely, and opened the drawer under the register where he kept the timer they used for draw drills. He pulled it out, hit the test button twice to make sure the battery was good, and headed back toward the range. On his way past the counter, he paused, turned, and raised his voice. "Anybody wants to see something funny," he announced to the shop. "Lane 12 in about 60 seconds. Gentleman in there says he's going to field strip an M14 blindfolded. Figured I'd give you the option." The father and his teenage son looked up from the rental case. The woman with the concealed carry paperwork looked up from her clipboard. The teenage boy said something quiet to his father, and the two of them started toward the range door. The woman followed. From the ammunition aisle, Mike Donovan, who had already paid for his box of 7.62, quietly set the box back on the counter and followed them too. By the time Chase pushed the door open to lane 12 with a small ceremonial flourish, there were 7 people crowded into the narrow observation area behind the shooting bench. One of the range's 2 other employees, a kid named Dalton in a matching black polo, had seen the procession and come out from the back office to see what the fuss was about. The father had his hand on his son's shoulder. The woman had her arms folded across her chest. Mike Donovan stood at the very back against the soundproof wall, with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes locked on the back of Virgil Halloran's head. Virgil did not turn around. He stood at the bench with the M14 in front of him, the red bandana folded next to the rifle, the 20-round magazine he had loaded earlier set off to the side. The overhead lights of lane 12 were the blue-white fluorescent kind, and they threw a hard, flat shine on the top of his cropped white head. He did not acknowledge the audience. He did not seem to notice them. "Rules are simple," Chase said, loud enough for everyone. "Full field strip, standard USGI M14 breakdown. On my mark, I start the clock. You get the rifle down to its component pieces, and sir, this is the key part. You keep that blindfold on the entire time. The moment I see you peek, we stop the clock. You got a question?" "How many pieces are you expecting?" Virgil said. "I'm sorry?" "Component pieces. I said how many are you expecting to see on the bench at the end?" Chase paused. He had not actually thought about that. He tried to remember what he had read in the single PDF he had downloaded about the M14 3 years ago. 7, 8, maybe, depending on how you count the flash suppressor group." 8, Virgil said, "with the gas cylinder lock assembly separated. That's how the armourer school used to count it. That all right with you?" Chase blinked. "Yeah, sure, 8. "All right," Virgil said. He picked up the bandana. He folded it with slow, arthritic care into a band about 2 inches wide. He lifted it to his eyes and tied it behind his head in a hard, old-fashioned square knot, the kind an 11-year-old scout learns and an 80-year-old sailor never forgets. He tested it with a fingertip. The cloth was opaque. The blindfold was secure. He dropped his hands to his sides. "Ready," he said. The line of shooters behind him did not speak. Someone near the back, one of the 2 other range employees, let out a small nervous laugh, and it died in his throat on the way out. Chase raised the stopwatch. His thumb hovered over the button. He grinned, one last time, at the assembled audience, as if to say, "Watch this. Watch what's about to happen to this old man." "On your mark," he said. 3, 2, 1, go." His thumb came down on the button with a soft plastic click, and Virgil Halloran's hands moved. It was not like watching a man work a rifle. It was like watching a conductor cue an orchestra he had rehearsed with for 50 years. The tremor in Virgil's right hand did not stop. It did not matter. His hands moved through the tremor, around it, underneath it, the way a fish moves through a current it has lived in its entire life. His left hand found the trigger guard latch, thumbed it down, and the trigger housing group dropped neatly into his waiting right palm. He set it on the bench. His palm did not need to search. The bench was where it always was. The piece went down in exactly the position it had gone down 10,000 times before. The stock came off next, inverted, slid free of the receiver in a single smooth motion, set down. The connector assembly, disengaged with a 1/4-inch lift of his thumb, set down. The operating rod spring and guide pulled free, set down. The operating rod itself rotated to the dismount notch, drawn rearward and up, set down. The bolt, released from the op rod lug, rolled off the receiver into his open palm. Set down. The barrel and receiver group lifted clear of the stockliner. Set down. The gas cylinder lock assembly, separated with the purpose-built gesture of a man who had performed this exact motion in rainstorms and sandstorms, and once, in the dark, in the back of a medevac helicopter, with a dead friend 3 feet to his left. 8 pieces, on the bench. In the order an armourer would lay them out to inspect from left to right, largest to smallest. Chase Brennan stopped the clock. He did not mean to stop it yet. His thumb moved of its own accord, the way a hand jerks back from a hot stove before the brain catches up. He looked down at the display. 0:47:19, 47.19 seconds. Behind him, no one in the observation area was breathing. The teenage boy had both hands pressed against his mouth. The woman with the concealed carry paperwork was staring at the bench with her eyes very wide and her lips very slightly parted. The father had taken his hand off his son's shoulder and had, at some point Chase had not seen, removed his ball cap and was holding it across his chest. Mike Donovan had not moved at all, but his jaw had tightened into a set line, and behind his eyes something was shining. Virgil stood at the bench with the blindfold still over his eyes, his hands hovering an inch above the table, his shoulders set. He had not moved since the 8th piece went down. "Am I done?" he asked quietly. Chase tried to speak. His throat felt strange. He cleared it. Yeah, you're done. That's 8. Then I'll put her back together if that's all right with you. You want to reassemble her, blindfolded." "Same blindfold," Virgil said. "Same clock if you've got the heart for it." Chase did not have the heart for it. He knew, in the pit of his stomach, in the place where a man goes to know the things he does not want to know, that what had just happened was not what he had thought was going to happen, and that what was about to happen next was going to be worse. He looked down at the stopwatch. His thumb was trembling now. He hit the reset button. He hit start. Virgil's hands moved. In reverse this time. Gas cylinder lock assembly onto the barrel and receiver seated into the stockliner. Bolt onto the receiver, rotated home. Operating rod into the bolt lug slid forward, rotated past the dismount notch. Operating rod spring and guide reinserted. Connector assembly tabbed back into place. Stock settled against the receiver. Trigger housing group indexed and snapped up with the heel of his left palm. Chase stopped the clock. 0 hours, 52 minutes, 4 seconds. 52 seconds. Forward assembly, from a pile of 8 components in the dark, by a man whose hand shook so badly he had been unable, 20 minutes earlier, to sign his own name in ink. Virgil reached up slowly, untied the bandana behind his head, and lowered it from his eyes. He blinked against the fluorescent light. He folded the bandana once, twice into its old triangle, and slipped it back into his pocket. He ran his hand once across the top of the reassembled rifle, the way a man might pat the flank of a horse he had ridden a long way. Then he turned, for the first time, to look at Chase Brennan. "Son," he said, "how'd I do?" Nobody spoke. Somewhere at the back of the crowd, in the quiet padded space between the 11th and the 12th lane, Mike Donovan was the one who finally said it. He said it softly, not really to anyone in particular, the way a man in a chapel might say a name he had been carrying a long time. "That's Duke Halloran," Mike said. The father turned. "What?" "That's Duke Halloran. That's who that is." The name did not mean anything to Chase Brennan. It did not mean anything to the woman with the concealed carry paperwork, or to the teenage boy, or to Dalton from the back office. But it meant something to Mike Donovan and the way he said it, the quiet, reverent, unbelieving way he said it, made everyone in the room turn and look at him as if he were the only person who could tell them what they were supposed to do next. Mike took one slow step forward, out from the back wall, into the light. He did not take his eyes off Virgil. "Gunnery Sergeant Halloran," he said. "2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, Distinguished Rifleman, 1969, Distinguished Marksman, 1971, Silver Star for the fight at Dido, 2 Purple Hearts, on the Marine Corps Rifle Team from 71 through 77, Head Instructor, Scout Sniper Instructor School, MCB Quantico, 79 through 86, wrote the chapter on combat optics in the 1984 Rifle Marksmanship Manual. They still teach it." Virgil looked at him. The old man's eyes had gone a little damp. "Who taught it to you, son?" "Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Ellis, sir, class of 91. Virgil closed his eyes. He opened them again. "How's Ray doing?" "Sergeant Major now, sir, retired 2 years ago. Runs a training outfit over near Fayetteville." "I know," Virgil said. "I know he does." Chase Brennan was still holding the stopwatch. His knuckles had gone white around it. His mirrored aviators had slipped down from the top of his head and were hanging crooked on one ear. He looked at Mike. He looked at Virgil. He looked at the M14 on the bench, fully reassembled, gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. He opened his mouth, and the small sound that came out was not a word. Mike Donovan turned to him. Mike's voice was no longer quiet. "Son," he said, "do you understand who you just told to stick to a 22? Chase's mouth worked. Nothing came out. "Do you understand," Mike said, "that this man standing right here taught the men who teach every Marine rifleman working a rifle today? Do you understand that the reason you have a job at this range, that this industry exists the way it exists, that there are books and drills and instructor certifications and scored national matches in this country at all, is because of men like him? Do you understand what you just laughed at?" Chase's face had gone a shade of white that was not healthy on a young man. I didn't know." "No, son," Mike said. "You didn't ask. There's a difference." From the front of the shop, muffled through 2 doors and a wall, came the sound of a bell. The front door bell, followed about 2 seconds later by the sound of boots on the tile floor of the shop. Deliberate boots, the kind of walk that told you before you saw the man that the man was coming to say something. The door to lane 12 swung open. The man who stepped through it was a little over 6 feet tall, in his early 60s, built like a plank of old hickory. He was wearing khakis, a pressed button-down shirt, and a navy blue jacket with a small embroidered crest on the left breast that nobody in the room immediately recognized. His hair was iron grey, high and tight. He had the dark skin and the sharp eyes of a man who had spent the majority of his adult life outdoors. He stopped 1 step inside the door. He looked at Chase. He looked at Mike. And then his eyes found Virgil Halloran at the bench, and something happened to his face that nobody in the room was prepared to see. He came to attention, not sloppily, not symbolically. He came to attention the way a man comes to attention for his own father's coffin. Heels together, shoulders squared, chin tucked, hands flat at the seams of his trousers. "Gunnery Sergeant Halloran," he said. His voice was low and clear. "Sergeant Major Ellis, United States Marine Corps, retired. Reporting." Virgil did not move for a moment. Then, slowly, with the care of a man whose joints no longer moved in the order his mind wanted them to, he drew his own shoulders back, brought his own heels together, and returned the bearing with the ghost of a proper Marine stance. The tremor in his hand did not stop. He did not try to hide it. "At ease, Sergeant Major," Virgil said. Ellis did not move at ease, not yet. His eyes were wet. "Gunny, we heard you were out here," Mike called. He gestured very briefly at the carpenter. "I came as soon as I got the word." "You came 68 miles, Ray." "I'd have come 600, Gunny." Chase Brennan had backed up 1 step, then another. He had backed, without realizing it, until his shoulders were against the soundproof foam of the divider wall. Sergeant Major Ellis turned to him slowly, and the look in Ellis's eyes was not cruel, which somehow made it worse. It was the look of a man who has seen something small and stupid in his life and has decided, out of respect for what the moment required, to be patient with it. "Son," Ellis said, "what's your name?" "Chase. Chase Brennan, sir. Chase." Ellis's mouth did not move. "I'm going to tell you a short story, Chase, and then I'm going to let you go back to your day, and I hope to the good Lord you will carry the story with you for the rest of your life." Chase nodded. He could not speak. "In the spring of 1991, Ellis said, I was a 20-year-old private first class at the School of Infantry. I could not shoot. I could not hit a man-sized target at 100 meters with a rifle I'd cleaned myself the night before. I was on the verge of being rolled out of the pipeline and reassigned to a job that would have ended my Marine Corps career before it started. And the gunnery sergeant running the instructor team at that school, this man standing at that bench, took me out to the range on a Sunday afternoon on his own time and sat beside me in the prone position for 4 hours and taught me, from the ground up, how to send a round where I meant to send it. I did not miss a target again for the rest of my career. Chase, not one. 33 years of service, 2 combat deployments, instructor billets at 3 schools, a competition rifle team, a command tour. All of it, every single piece of it, was given to me by Gunnery Sergeant Virgil Halloran on a Sunday afternoon in 1991 when he had no professional reason to give me his time. That is the man you spent the morning making jokes about, son. That is the man whose hands you told to stick to a .22. Chase's face had gone entirely still. Not white anymore, just still. I'm not finished, Ellis said. Yes, sir. That rifle on that bench, Ellis pointed without looking at the M14. That rifle is the one he carried at Dido in May of 1968. You can look the battle up tonight, Chase, and I want you to. You can read about what a 22-year-old lance corporal with that rifle did on a piece of ground in the Republic of Vietnam over the course of 4 days and 3 nights. You can read about the men he brought out of there when the company had been reduced to 40%. You can read the citation for the Silver Star that is currently in a frame on the wall of his bedroom, next to a Purple Heart with an oak leaf cluster and a photograph of his wife. And then, Chase, and this is the last thing I will say to you today, I would like you to go find a mirror, and I would like you to stand in front of it for about 60 seconds, and I would like you to ask yourself what kind of man you thought you were this morning, and what kind of man you want to be before you go to bed tonight. Do you understand me, son? Chase's voice was barely audible. Yes, sir. Good. Sergeant Major Ellis turned slowly and faced Virgil Halloran again. The hardness went out of his shoulders. Something else came into his face. Something younger and something older, both at once. 40 years of service fell off him like a coat. He stepped forward, and he took Virgil's shaking right hand in both of his own, and he held it. Gunny, he said, you want to get some lunch? There's a diner about 12 miles up the road. Meatloaf's decent. I buy. Virgil looked up at his old student. His denim blue eyes were wet now, and he was not hiding it anymore, and he did not care who saw. Ray, he said, I would love some meatloaf. Chase Brennan did not finish his shift that day. He did not finish it the way you might think. He did not quit. He did not get fired. He walked instead back out to the shop, through the storefront, across the parking lot to his own pickup truck at the far end of the lot. He sat behind the wheel for about 40 minutes, not moving, not crying, just staring at the faded Marine Corps sticker in the back window of the green Ford parked 2 spaces away. Then he walked back into the shop, past Dalton, past the register, into the bay, and down the padded hallway, and he stopped outside the open door of Lane 12, where Mike Donovan and Sergeant Major Ellis were helping Virgil Halloran pack his rifle carefully back into its steel lockbox. He did not go inside. He stood in the doorway. He waited until Virgil looked up. Mr. Halloran, he said. He did not use the word sir. He had not earned the word sir, and he knew it. I wanted to tell you before you left. I was wrong. I was wrong about every single thing I said to you today, and there is nothing in the world I can say that makes that right. But I wanted you to hear me say it, out loud, to your face. Virgil Halloran snapped the lid of the lockbox shut. He set the latch. He looked up at the young man in the doorway for a long, quiet moment, and then he did something that Chase Brennan was not prepared for. He did not lecture. He did not scowl. He did not enjoy the apology. He just walked over, a little slower than he had walked in that morning, and he put his shaking right hand on Chase Brennan's shoulder and gave it one small, firm squeeze. Son, he said, I was 26 once too. I was worse than you, to tell you the truth. I had a gunnery sergeant in 1966 who should have thrown me off a catwalk and didn't. I remember what he said to me the day I finally figured out what he'd given me. You want to hear it? Chase nodded. He could not speak. He said, Halloran, the only thing I want from you is that you do better tomorrow than you did today, and that, when the time comes, you do for some other dumb kid what I did for you. That's all, son. That's the whole deal. Virgil squeezed his shoulder one more time. Then he let go, picked up the handle of his lockbox, and walked out of Lane 12 for the last time that day, with Sergeant Major Ellis on one side of him, and Mike Donovan on the other, the 3 of them passing slowly through the shop and out into the bright October sunlight of the parking lot. The bell over the front door rang as they left. It rang the same way it had rung when Virgil had come in, almost 3 hours earlier. But it did not sound the same. It did not sound the same at all. In the weeks that followed, a number of things changed at Cedar Ridge Tactical, quietly and without press release. A framed print appeared on the wall beside the register. It was a photograph, an old black and white photograph enlarged and matted. of two young men in marine utilities on a dirt road in front of a line of sandbags. One of them was holding an M14 in the port arms position. The other one was laughing. Below the photograph, in a small brass plate, there was an inscription: Gunnery Sergeant Virgil Duke Halloran, USMC, and Lance Corporal Wendell R. Carter, USMC, 1968. This range is honoured to have served them. The print had been paid for, framed, and hung by Chase Brennan on his own dime on a Sunday afternoon without being asked. A new sign appeared below the print, hand-lettered in the same style as the no-loaded weapons sign above the counter, and it read, All veterans over the age of 65 shoot for free at Cedar Ridge. No waiver fee, no lane fee, every Tuesday forever. Chase Brennan enrolled at his own expense in a 2-week NRA rifle instructor course. He completed it. He enrolled in a second course after that, a more advanced one, taught by a retired sergeant major named Raymond Ellis at a training facility 68 miles to the east. He was not the fastest student in the class. He was not the best shot. But he was, according to the instructor's final written evaluation, among the most attentive and the most respectful students the program had taken in 5 years of operation. At the end of the course, Sergeant Major Ellis handed him his certificate, shook his hand, and said quietly, so that only Chase could hear, You're going to be all right, son. Don't forget who brought you this chance. Chase did not forget. Virgil Halloran came back to Cedar Ridge Tactical exactly 11 days after the morning of the stopwatch. He came on a Tuesday. He came with his lockbox. And when he stepped through the front door of the shop, every person behind the counter, Chase Brennan included, stood up without being asked. Chase walked out from behind the register, met Virgil in the middle of the floor and did something he had never in his life done before, and that nobody at Cedar Ridge had ever seen him do. He stood at a proper, respectful attention, and he said, in a voice that did not shake but was not quite steady either, Mr. Halloran, welcome back to Cedar Ridge. Lane 12 is ready for you, sir. I took the liberty of cleaning it myself. Virgil Halloran, 78 years old, tremor still in his right hand, eyes bright, gave the young man the smallest nod a human face could produce. Thank you, son, he said. And then he walked, slowly, past the register, past the framed photograph on the wall, past the new sign below it, past the woman at the counter, who was on her second concealed carry refresher now, and who quietly set her pen down as he passed, all the way to the door at the back of the shop that led to lane 12. And he went inside and he closed the door behind him, and the old bell above the front door was still ringing faintly from the draft. Over the months that followed, Virgil came to Cedar Ridge almost every Tuesday. He did not always shoot. Sometimes he sat on the bench at the back of the shop and drank coffee and told stories to the teenage son of the father who had been there on the morning of the stopwatch. The boy, whose name was Daniel, had asked his father that very afternoon whether Marines still trained people the way that old man had trained the sergeant major, and his father had answered that yes, they still did, and that if the boy ever wanted to look into it seriously, they would sit down together and start asking the right questions. 6 months later, Daniel enrolled in the delayed entry program. He sent Virgil a letter the week he shipped for boot camp. Virgil kept it in his wallet behind the photograph. Chase Brennan became, in time, one of Cedar Ridge's best-known instructors. He specialized in new shooters. He was known, around the region, for a particular habit. He would never, not once, not for any reason, make a joke at the expense of an older customer. Not about their age, not about their hands, not about the rifle they brought in. New employees learned the rule on their first day. When they asked why, Chase would tell them, briefly and without embellishment, about a morning in October and a stopwatch and an old Marine with a red bandana. He would tell them 8 pieces in 47 seconds. He would tell them reassembled in 52. He would tell them he had deserved every cold word the sergeant major said to him, and that he hoped they never had to learn the lesson the same way he had learned it. Sergeant Major Ellis visited Virgil at his home in North Carolina once a month for the rest of Virgil's life. They drank coffee on the porch. They looked at the tree line where the mist came up in the morning. They did not always talk. They did not need to. They had said most of what needed saying in a bay called Lane 12 on a Tuesday morning, in front of a young man who had very badly needed to hear it. And somewhere in a small frame beside the register at Cedar Ridge Tactical, a stopwatch sat on a strip of green felt, its display permanently stopped at 47.19 seconds, with a small brass placard beneath it that read, the fastest full field strip recorded at this range, Blindfolded, by a man whose hands were shaking too badly to sign his name. May we never again be fooled into thinking we know what a person is capable of before we have seen what they have already done. If this story moved you, and you believe the older veterans in this country still deserve the respect we promised them when they raised their right hands, do one small thing before you close this video. Hit the subscribe button. Share this story with a veteran in your life or with a young person who needs to hear it. And remember, the next time you walk past an old man with shaking hands in a parking lot, or in a store or in a line at the VA, that you have no idea, none at all, what those hands have already done or what they are still capable of doing when it matters. Semper Fi Duke. Rest easy.